Hi there, my name is Stephanie and welcome to Sewing with Stephanie. As you know, this is where we make sewing and design cool, modern, and fun, of course. So if this is your first time, make sure you click subscribe down below as well as the thumbs up to give it a like. So today we are going to learn how to drape a basic bodice. Very simple, but this is actually the framework and the base learning that is going to be able to make you sew anything and make anything that you want. Okay, so we're gonna get started with what you need. So by now, I'm sure you've already watched my video on how to prepare your mannequin, so your mannequin is ready. As well as your mannequin, you're going to need about a yard, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, of plain muslin or any scrap fabric. Muslin is great because you really don't want to see too many prints and patterns when you're creating an initial drape. You want it to be all about getting that fit and being able to see all the little wrinkles and the pulls. So if you're draping with a crazy fabric, sometimes it can be hard to catch those details. You also are going to need scissors, always. You are going to need a Sharpie or some kind of pen that'll mark up and stay on muslin. I choose a fine point Sharpie. I find it to be the easiest. You can also use a ruler or a measuring tape. It's really preference, whatever you guys like. Sometimes I use both all the time. And then lastly, as always, you need lots and lots of little flathead pins. And I keep them on my mannequin just so they are easy at hand, so I'm ready to go. So first things first, you're gonna take your muslin and you're gonna mark the cross grain. So for those of you who don't know, the grain runs along the edge of the fabric. So it tends to be where the fabric is folded in the store or along that selvage, that bound edge. The cross grain runs, you guessed it, across. And then let's just rip it in half because we don't need too much. We just need a little bit for the front and a little bit for the back. And I'm gonna rip it in half. The great thing is if you rip on the grain, you don't need scissors. The first thing to do is to make sure that grain line is parallel to the bust bridge. So it doesn't have to be, some people drape it, make sure that that cross grain line is directly on the bust line. It doesn't have to be. It can be a little bit above, but you just wanna make sure that it's parallel. And then using your hands, just feel it all the way up to the top shoulder neckline mark. And you can feel when your mannequin where that ridge is. That's where you want to mark. And then let's go right ahead and make another pinpoint at the edge of that line where the shoulder, that line meets the shoulder. So you have two pins, one at the neck and one at the shoulder. And you're making sure that that cross grain is parallel. If it's not, mine's like maybe a little droopy, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna pin it. It is imperative that you know if you're draping on the grain, and this is really at a certain point, you don't need to make that mark because you can see in the fabric. I don't always mark off that cross grain, but you need to know where that grain is in order to make a successful drape. Okay, so we are going to drape a basic symmetric bodice. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to smooth that fabric out and pin about 3/4 of an inch down from that center neckline. Maybe like a 1/2 inch. It's up to you where you want that neckline. You can always move it around. And you're gonna see right away you create that fold. You'll see there's that tension that's being pulled between those two pins. Right away, get those scissors out. Because anytime, the principle of draping is anytime you see folds where you don't want them to be, you need to release that tension. So I'm going to snip right up. And I'm gonna cut off some of this extra. I know there's a lot of ways to do this. Some people smooth out different ways first. You're gonna find your style after you work with it a little more. I've only released part of the tension. You can see I still have a little bit right here. What I like to do is go in with my Sharpie. Now that I have a little bit more visibility, I like to go in now and mark exactly where the pin is at the neck and at the shoulder. And I'm making marks that are kind of little L's so I can see exactly where that is. So you want to work slowly, but using your fingers, I would make a little mark if you know that's where your neckline is going to be, and then cut, okay? And then maybe I can do a few more cuts since I already know that I'm going to do a basic neckline. I'm just going to cut all the way down to that neckline. And you can see I'm really releasing that tension. Now you might have released enough tension that you can repin that center pin. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mark off with my Sharpie where I want that neckline to be. We are creating a very basic bodice drape. That means very little style lines, and a very basic fit. You can use this as the foundation for flat pattern making. You can use it for future draping, and it's also a really great way to practice your skills draping on your mannequin. Okay, now I'm gonna mark off the center front. Just gonna use my fingers to feel where that center front is, and then you'll go back, there we go, and measure that up later. Sometimes I like to take my ruler and, you know, with a straight edge, sort of create that line, but it is not imperative. Now you know where your center front is. It's always great to write down CF, center front, and then you can add a few more pins in here. We need to move on to the side. So the next thing you want to make sure you do is pin the apex of the bust on the side that you're working on. You can use that to then mold the material in the way you want. When we are looking at the armhole, it's very similar to the neckline. I make a few initial marks of where I'd like to see that armhole go, and then I go right back in with my scissors and get a little closer, maybe cut out the fabric, and then kind of snip up to that line to release any tension. It's important not to snip too much at the beginning so that you don't accidentally cut through those design lines. Okay, now there's always a bit of extra fabric right from where the bust connects to the shoulder, and that's because the body dips, and that's okay. What we like to do is pin a tiny bit of ease. Ease can be about 1/8 to 1/4 inch. You just kind of fold the fabric in on itself and then pin to hold that tiny bit of ease. When you are creating a pattern, that's going to allow that movement back and front. So we're going to keep that right there. And then we are going to decide how we would like the rest of the drape to go. My personal favorite way to create a basic bodice is to flatten out the side and have the dart be right under the bust at the princess seam. Some people prefer to put the dart in the armhole. Some people prefer to put it right into the side seam. The important thing to remember is that in order to get rid of this extra fabric, there needs to be a dart somewhere. I'm going to drape into the waist seam. That means I'm going to continue pinning along where my base of my armhole is. So when pinning your side seam, I have a pin in my mannequin that is 5.5 inches down from the top of the shoulder. And then I'm just going to do a quick little mark of the side seam and pin it right at that waistline. So we have a nice, flush, even side seam, and it's marked off. Probably repin that. I always think draping is a bit like baking cookies or something. There's a lot of kneading and working with the fabric in the same way that you would work with dough or something like that. I would imagine. I don't really bake. Now, flipping back to the front, I'm going to pin down that center front right where it meets the waistband. Now you can see that I've basically flattened out the entire front except for this extra fabric, which is going to become the drape at the princess seam under the bust. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove a bit of the extra fabric so that it's easier to work with. Just kind of cut it right off. Now you can see what we're working with, and we're really going to apply the same principles that we did at the neckline to this waist seam. You can see you have those eyelash pulls right there. First thing to do is let's go in and let's pin this dart. Let's pin the fabric to itself first and see how much we need to get rid of. See how big this dart needs to be in order to make this fall smooth. So I pinned just a few pins, and now I'm going to get rid of a little bit more. And let's just cut up. And you can see those eyelash pulls just melt away. They just disappear. And then you can go back and assess, all right, well, maybe I can pull it a little tighter, you know? And you can see how smooth that is. Again, you want to go back in with your Sharpie and right over that waistline. Remember, we've got the waistline marked with our poly satin ribbon, and we're just going to mark. You can make little dots, either way. When you're marking off the dart, you want to fold it one way and mark along where that waistline is, and then you want to fold it back. And again, mark along where that waistline is. That'll become very important later. So now we have marked off that waist side seam. We have marked off the neckline. We've marked off the shoulder. We have a tiny bit of ease at the armhole. We've marked off the center front and the side seam. And I like to release that ease pin after I feel pretty good about my drape, just to see how that looks. You want to also mark off this dart. So I want to mark all the way to the top of where it hits the apex, measuring down, or sorry, marking down by the pins, the same on both sides. So that once we take it off the mannequin, we know exactly how big that dart is. Now that we have our front bodice draped, we have to drape the back. So we're going to keep the front bodice on for now, and we're going to just fold back the parts that will cross over with our back drape. So I'm just going to take these pins out and just fold it back. I want to keep it there for later. So we're going to take our other piece of muslin that we already have pre-marked with the cross grain. We're going to do the same thing. The good news is the back is very similar to the front. It's even easier. I'm going to place it right about there, making sure the cross grain is parallel to the floor. If you marked the straight grain, you want the straight grain parallel to the center back. I'm going to start pinning center back first, about a 1/4 inch down from the center back. And then just like as before, I'm going to go straight to the neck shoulder seam. I'm going to take out those eyelash wrinkles by first, I'm going to trim down the fabric, and then I'm going to make a few little snips to release the tension. They're not quite going all the way to the line yet, but at least that's giving me an idea. You know what? I think I could pull it a little bit even closer to this side seam. And that is nice and flat and sexy looking. So I'm going to mark it off with exactly where my neckline should be. Now you can match up your front and back pieces now if you want to flip back and forth and make sure that you marked off the exact right place where those shoulder seams hit. I try to do the best I can while I'm working, but I always double check when I'm truing up my patterns, when I take them and convert them into tracing paper patterns. Let's snip this up, make it a little cleaner. Maybe get rid of a little bit extra fabric here. And then we will mark off center back. So I'm going to pin it down all the way at the waist. That's such a nice smooth line right here. And I've pinned up the center back. I'm going to mark it with a CB, center back. I'm going to go back to the top here and smooth out the shoulder seam, the top of the shoulder. I'm going to smooth out the armhole and make a few marks. Again, about halfway down from the armhole is a good place to make a mark, and then sort of go from there, making little dots with your Sharpie or little marks, kind of create that line. And then we want to smooth over from there. So you can see I've pinned about halfway down at the armhole, and then I'm smoothing the fabric over from there. Again, I have the pin head already in here to mark where the top of my armhole, or where my side seam would be. So I can pin it again. And before I cut it, before I mark it, I'm going to cut off all this extra fabric to make my life a lot easier. It's my favorite part, like cutting away the fabric. I feel like I'm slowly revealing this beautiful dress. It feels like I'm carving out a sculpture. And I'm carving a sculpture. And then you're going to mark off that seam. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, we're going to go back and we're going to make sure that everything's round and everything's trued up. All right, so now we've marked that side underneath the armhole. I'm going to do the same thing for the side seam. So flatten out from there. You already have the pin holding the top. Let's put another pin in at the waistline. And I'm going to do the same thing on the waistline here. Get rid of that fabric. Careful, things kind of come out if you work a little too fast. So I have to go back and repin this center back here. Now I want to make sure things have moved a little. want to make sure I remark that, double check. And then, again, just like before, I'm going to pull in that extra fabric and smooth it out. So because of the back shape, that dart tends to be much bigger, which is why some people put it into the shoulder seam. But like I said, I like to create just one simple dart. And in future episodes, I will teach you how to manipulate that dart if you decide that you want to put it into the shoulder seam. Now that I have my dart all pinned up, again, I'm going to go back and make sure I'm releasing all possible tension here to make sure it's as smooth as possible, cutting right up to that seam line. And then you can go back and you can readjust your dart, you can readjust your side, make sure everything is marked off. Didn't mark off my side seam here. Maybe add a few more marks to the side seam. And then simply go back just as we did in the front, mark off your waistline, fold that dart one direction, and then fold the dart the other direction, and do it again. And then don't forget to mark off that dart exactly where, all the way to the top of where the fullness goes. Both sides. Okay. And what's the last step? Did you remember? Mark it off. I'm writing Stephanie, basic bodice. Trust me, you are going to use this so many times. It's worth it. Basic bodice, back. Okay. When you're done, be sure to go back and double check your work. Make sure everything is marked off so that you know what it means, and make sure that your drape is smooth the way you would want it.